It's one thing when bureaucrats use their political stature for their own gain. It's not right, but it's about as predictable as death and taxes. Historically, politicians have done this on the down low, but it's 2021 and now they're not only doing it, but parading it on social media for brownie points and votes in the next election. Only this time around, gun owners are losing their carry permits in the crossfire. Keep watching for the details. Hi Liberty fam, and welcome back to the channel. This video is brought to you today by the United States Concealed Carry Association, an organization that literally helps to save lives. The USCCA is a membership association that provides self-defense education, training, and peace of mind to over 600,000 responsibly armed Americans nationwide. Plus, all memberships come with self-defense liability insurance. To get started with the USCCA and get a free family defense guide, go to uscca.com/libertydoll. I saw this story tucked away in a corner of the internet and am really surprised that it isn't getting more attention, as it's some pretty twisted and inflammatory stuff. You see, in the state of Florida, the gun licensing program is overseen by the state's Commissioner of Agriculture. Her name is Nikki Fried, and she also just so happens to be running against DeSantis for governor. As part of her political campaign, she has apparently decided to revoke a bunch of gun licenses from the folks who were at the January 6th rally, and then announce it on Twitter for political clout.
Oh, that's a plot twist.
Fried is the only Democrat to hold statewide office in Florida, and she is certainly making sure people know about it by announcing the license suspensions of every gun-owning Floridian arrested for attending January 6th. Back on July 27th, she posted to Twitter, "I just suspended the concealed weapons permits of 22 people involved in the insurrection against the United States of America instigated by Donald Trump on January 6, 2021. Comments were largely in support of her actions, asking how terrorists had managed to get permits to begin with, or celebrating it as the sort of common-sense gun reform the country needs. Now, the state of Florida does allow Fried to suspend the permits of people who have been charged with certain crimes, namely felonies or misdemeanors involving domestic violence, drug crimes, or multiple DUIs, as those charges would make them a prohibited person. These types of suspensions are supposed to be temporary, lasting only until the end of the trial, but obviously, not every crime qualifies under this rule, and several of the folks from Florida were charged with misdemeanors that don't qualify. A search of records on the DOJ website shows that, in fact, a lot of them only hold charges of disorderly conduct or entering a restricted building.
The plot thickens.
And at the time of her announcement, some of them hadn't even been charged yet. All but a couple hadn't had their days in court, and the ones that did had entered guilty pleas to various disorderly conduct and picketing charges. Nevertheless, her press release accused them all of terrorism, treason, and sedition. It's also kind of weirdly coincidental that she decided to do this on the exact same day that the House committee investigating January 6th had its first hearing and used that for extra clout in the press release. This, of course, raised questions as to whether she was acting legally within her scope of state official or engaging in virtue-signaling activism for the sake of her campaign. Florida Carry Inc. sent a public records request to Fried's office the very next day, asking for the suspension notices and qualifying charging documents and criminal records that allowed her to do this. Note, the group did not ask for identifying information on who had their licenses revoked, as that information is supposed to be confidential. They simply asked for proof that she was acting legally and requested that any personal information in those documents be redacted in order to comply with the law. Fried ignored the request, which is, well, a violation of state law. Her silence isn't proof, but does also provide us a very likely answer to Florida Carrie's question.
Of course it's appropriate.
Then, last month on October 19th, she tweeted again announcing the suspension of an additional 6 licenses of domestic terrorists, bringing the total to 28, stating that she and her office would continue working to hold these traitors accountable. None of the folks from Florida have been charged with treason, and only a handful of the 63 arrests from Florida were charged with anything that could even remotely fall under the federal guidelines for terrorism charges. At this point, allegedly, all of the Florida arrests that had carry permits have now had them suspended. And again, while that personal information is supposed to be confidential, when it's half of the people that were arrested, you have a 50-50 chance of guessing who it is. That same day, she released a public statement. The storming of the Capitol on January 6th, where we witnessed acts of violence and domestic terrorism intended to undermine our democratic institutions, shook our nation to its core, and its impact continues to be felt every day. The individuals involved must be held accountable for their treasonous actions. While Florida has the shameful distinction of being home to the largest proportion of individuals charged in relation to the insurrection, our department has been using its lawful authority and carrying out its legal duty to suspend the licenses of anyone charged with disqualifying offenses. When we announced the initial 22 suspensions earlier this summer, we made it clear that this would be an ongoing effort and that additional suspensions and revocations would be issued as additional charges were filed and sentences rendered. Since that time, FDACS has suspended 6 additional licenses of individuals related to the insurrection, and should further charges and sentences come down, we will enact further suspensions and revocations of licenses issued by our department as required by Florida statute. 2 days later, her office officially recognized the records request almost a full 3 months after it was sent. The acknowledgement included a reference number and told Florida Carrie to check the government portal for any future updates. To date, her office still has not supplied any of the documents or returned any phone calls, emails, or messages. But when the Second Amendment Foundation asked for an interview, Freed's communication director responded that the office legally couldn't provide any personal information about the revoked licenses, as Florida law requires that information to remain confidential and off the public record. Which A, had nothing to do with the interview request, and B, was specifically addressed in the records request. Supporters of the move, such as writer Amy Sherman of the Tampa Bay Times, says the move is perfectly fine and legitimate because people who have had their licenses revoked can request a hearing if they want. She also admitted in the same piece that when a Florida attorney criticized the lack of due process, Sherman and the Times used their fact-checking relationship with Facebook to flag the post as fake news and misinformation. Sherman also included 4 people and their charges as an example of why people had their licenses revoked. She, of course, chose to display a former cop, the first guy to be sentenced to a felony, and, of course, known Proud Boy Joseph Biggs, all of which are not really a fair representation of the other 60 Florida residents who have been arrested. What's ironic is that the whole reason the state originally put the licensing program under the Department of Agriculture is so that there could be a state official who could be held accountable for abusing or misusing the licensing program. Go figure. What's also ironic is, interestingly enough, Freed is also the only state official known to have both a carry permit and a Florida medical marijuana card, even though it still, to my knowledge, would make her a prohibited person herself. Funny how that works. That's it for today's video. Please like, share, and drop a comment, or even subscribe if you're new here. You can also check out all of my support options in the description if you'd like to help the channel out in other ways. As always, thanks for tuning in, stay safe, and happy shooting.